Hello, everyone. It is Coach Duquesa here with another episode of Safe Space Conversations. On this show, we give women specifically tips and tools that they may use to help elevate their lives. And tonight, we are fortunate to have a male guest who will help women and men tonight learn how to create safe spaces for each other. I'm super excited about this conversation simply because conflict resolution is something that I believe deserves a lot more attention in our world today. And also, at the rate that we're seeing relationships and marriages being broken, we definitely can use support in that area of teaching us how to get along with one another, to agree to disagree, to cultivate space for each other, and to just learn that it's okay to have differences, to agree to disagree. But more specifically tonight, I am challenging my women audience to rise to a higher standard in providing safe spaces for men. And we can only do that when we get tips, tools, and resources. And who better to get it from than men? So I'm not going to tell you all about my guest because I want him to introduce himself, but I will give you a bit of his background. He is someone that believes that entrepreneurship can be a vehicle for social change. He actually grew up in a house full of entrepreneurs, and I could just imagine what that looked like. His dad was a general contractor and a real estate appraiser and inspector. His mom had her own daycare for many years. And one of the things that his dad taught him was that entrepreneurship is a pathway to controlling your own future and making a difference in the world. So, as a young person, Bert developed his entrepreneurial muscles as a paper boy in junior high school. He learned the power of creating his own personal economy and loved the feeling of creating a paycheck at will. I equate that to freedom. Bert is someone that I would label a change agent. From the very moment I met him, I knew that there was something different, something special about him. But his drive to be a change agent came from watching his dad start a neighborhood watch program on his block where they lived in Los Angeles. And the goal of that neighborhood program was to give a safe space for neighbors and kids, especially his own, from criminal element that was often present on his street. And so Bert honors his dad's legacy by ongoing community service as a member of the Omega Psi Phi fraternity, serving on the board of directors of the University of California, Riverside Alumni Association, and as a member of the University of California Riverside Chancellor's Advisory Committee. Bert is a servant leader, he is a social entrepreneur. He is an Amazon #1 best-selling author and a certified hypnotist. Bert, welcome to Safe Space Conversations. I invite you to tell us a little bit more about yourself because I stuck to business, but I am sure that there is so much more that you can share so our audience can get to know a bit more about who you are.
Well, thank you, DeQuesta, for allowing me to be a guest of your show today. I think it's history making. As you mentioned earlier, I think I am the first male guest you've had on your show. So I honor that space. I'm grateful to be in that space, DeQuesta, today. So a little more about myself. Besides all the wonderful accolades that DeQuesta have shared, I would say at the end of the day, I am a servant leader with a servant heart. I come from a teacher background. I've been happily married for 12 plus years to my beautiful wife, Xkizin. We live here in Riverside, California. And I just want to hopefully set a space and have a conversation about how can we really create a safe space for men through their life journey. And I've gone through some trials and tribulations, and I can clearly point to situations where I wish I had safe spaces, and there were opportunities where I've been in safe spaces that allow me to be able to really share my truest, most authentic, most vulnerable thoughts I've had there at Questa. So that's what we're here to do today as well. And I look forward to having those conversations. And like I said, I receive all those words. I think even as men, we, kind of go into the conversation. I think as men, we find it hard to receive praise for what we do, right? We just show up and we just get to work. But what I'm realizing though, that even in this talk about safe space, it means being even okay to receive praise, to receive our flowers, right, for what we do. So I love this conversation, and hope I can still stand, and I can stand the gap for men and women regarding this topic as well today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Bert. I see Kelly Ashley Armstrong is saying, hi, Dubasa. Hi, Bert. Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Bert, in hearing all that you said, I wonder if you could share with us so that we can establish what a safe space is and perhaps what it does, is if you can share with us a time when you needed a safe space and whether it was cultivated or not.
Mm. So I think as I was preparing for this conversation regarding safe space, I think we need to start with kind of at the very beginning of what does it mean to be a man, or how do we define masculinity? Because it does kind of tie into the regarding what happening regarding safe space. So I just had a birthday recently. I turned 49 about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, and I grew up in a time when to be defined a man was pretty defined by biological characteristics. And why is that important as a foundational piece? Because we've seen the world shift as to what it may mean to be a man from years ago to now. And so when we talk about having a need for a safe space, this kind of leads into kind of your question there, the question is, when a man says he needs safe space, what is he really asking for? And the person on the receiving end, do they have the capacity to create a safe space? So I kind of stop there and share, what are your thoughts about that? Because I think when we talk about safe spaces, it isn't just about having a desire for safe space. It's can a person have the capacity to create a safe space? So for me, a couple things come to mind. 20 plus years ago, my father passed away. It sounded like the beginning chorus of a country song. 20 years plus years ago, in a matter of about 6 months, my father passed away. I got fired from my job, and the woman I thought we was going to marry at that time, we broke up in a matter of 6 months. So I'm having significant emotional trauma in a matter of 6 months. Probably my mid-20s at that time, and I didn't know I didn't know then what I know now regarding how to process all those emotions, which is, where do I go? Where do I turn to? Who do I talk about? If I cry to my boys, I think I'm a punk, or I think like, man, just suck it up. Can I cry to my mama? But at that point, some moms, I love my mom to death. She's around, still around to this day. She might have been like, boy, I don't know what to tell you, right? You know what I'm saying? Because my dad had passed away, prior to at the same time, right? So that was probably the first time in my life when I realized I really needed a safe space as a man to process the world. And I didn't have the skill set or the language to even know how to ask for that. So that's kind of my first time I remember I needed a safe space more than anything else. Yeah.
That's an important thing to indicate, though, that we have to first know what that safe space is, right? And if the person has the capacity to give us that safe space that we need. And when I think about where men go to cry, Bert, all this week I thought about that question: where do men go to cry? Where do men go to cry? Because we have been taught that to be a man means that there should be certain characteristics, right? A part of your answer was about society or families or whoever dictates that men should be a particular thing. And so what do you believe society expects men to look like? Because in 6 months you went through a lot of trauma, and I'm going to come back to that trauma.
Right.
But I want to first see if we could establish what traditional meaning people attach to being a man.
Mm. That's a good question, because I would say it has shifted over the decades, right? When I started I initially answered your question, I said at one point being a man was partially biological and partially sociological, whatever, right? Which was, men were very stoic, probably unemotional. If they're married and have kids, they were the judge, jury, and executor sometimes in the household, right? They might have been defined as how many women they slept with at one point. You often hear the phrase provider protector many ways. And so those would probably be some older point of views, right? That their job is to go out there. We use the phrase, so get the bacon, hunt the bacon, what I'm saying, different things, right? When you fast forward decades later, there is probably this desire for men to be more emotionally aware or self-aware, right? Or there's a desire for that, right? So I want to share a quick general stat that I thought was very fascinating. So my wife is a therapist by training, I shared this earlier, where she indicated that, talking about the title where men go to cry, and why this conversation is so important is that men who lack a place for release can have severe detrimental results, and very unhealthy results, right? So my wife indicated a statement she shared with me earlier this week was that when it comes to suicide conversations, suicidal ideations, women tend to be more apt to attempt suicide more often than not. However, when it comes to suicide completion rates, which means they actually follow through, men have a higher percentage of completion rates to suicide, which,
Wow.
wow, because men are not taught to release their emotions. They're taught to hold on to the emotions, anyways, right? And so when it comes to that process, they're like, I don't know where to go. I don't know what to deal with it. I would just, kill myself, right? And so there are so many different levels of how we can have this conversation, right? One is, can the spouse, in this case the wife, handle a man as a full breakdown? I mean, full blown, utter, just collapse, breakdown, right? I don't know. That's a good question. I really don't know. Like, I don't know. The other part of that equation is, can a man handle themselves in full, utter breakdown, right? Because we might really know what it means for us to be in full, utter breakdown. And to that point, when a man comes to a woman, whether it's his mother or a sister or aunt or a woman he's dating or his wife, and he's in breakdown at a level that she's never seen before, does she have the capacity to handle that? You know what I'm saying? Because because I think one of men's greatest fear from their woman in their life is to be seen as less manly because he's having utter breakdown. So what happens is this, the question is that men won't go into utter breakdown. They won't start crying. But what you notice is this, and I think this is very important. Two words that are very important for the men listening, for the women listening. They'll experience what I call emotional leakage. Emotional leakage, right? Because what does that look like? I'll be very transparent. So about a year and a half ago, my wife had some medical issues that we required that she undergo a significant surgery. That surgery affected our ability to have children naturally. What I didn't realize at that time, as I was kind of tending to my wife in her healing process and through her overall general journey through this medical procedure, that I never allowed my time to process and deal with my own emotions of this medical process she had to go through as well there too. What I found was that I started to internalize all these emotions. However, I was having emotional leakage. And I'll be very transparent. So what does that mean for me? So my wife did share with me later, a few months down the road, she knows that I was not initiating sex as often because I was in my own head. It was almost like I had lost the drive from that standpoint. So in transparency for the women out there, your man may be going through a lot. He may never tell you, but it's how he shows up now is when you begin to see the emotional leakage taking place in his life. I know it's a long answer to your question, but yeah, hopefully give some.
So what I'm hearing from you is that um, men feel things deeply,
Yes.
and that they show it. Like for you, it was a shutdown of that connection between you and your wife from a sexual standpoint. So they may show that breakdown in ways other than women anticipate. and that we may have to look for that and perhaps see where that's coming from. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you kind of give us a hint.
Right.
Okay, all right. I wanted to make sure that we got that right. Guys, that you're watching, let us know in the comment field if you believe that men have a safe place to go to cry. Where do you believe men go to cry? Let us know if you believe that men have emotions or if they're just emotionless as Bert and I continue this conversation. Because Bert had a number of traumatic things happen to him in a 6 month period when he was younger. And so, Bert, I want to ask you, where did you find support through grief? Where did you find support? And that's grief of a loved one. Where did you find support with grief from a breakup? Like, where did you find support? What did that look like at that particular time? And was it sufficient?
Uh, that is a profound question. I gotta go back to that time in my life. I would say that for me, that's when I started journaling around that time. I don't know where the idea came from. I just started journaling to give myself a space to where to put all these emotions in a very raw and unfiltered space. I was an English major in college, so I like to write. I write a lot in ways. So by default, I'm okay with writing quite a bit and share my emotions through the written word in many ways. A lot of lonely drives by myself, just driving around, right? Just drive around the city, different things. I remember one time I was driving home one time and I just sat in the car and I just started crying, like just to myself. Like, I didn't know who to turn to or whatever, right? I've never really been big into alcohol, but I remember probably drinking a little bit more, probably different things. Oftentimes, I hate to say it, sometimes men will look toward different external tools to help them deal with the emotions as well. So, and I just sucked it up. Really, I wish and I actually did try. So this is also very important. I actually tried counseling therapy during that same time. And if you have any therapists out there watching your show, or like I said, if you're the woman who holds the space for the man in your life, it is important to realize that how you treat that opportunity or responsibility to hold this man's emotional space is a very heavy assignment. Let me say that again, because I think if you're a woman in a man's life or a therapist, and you are being asked or tasked to hold this man's emotional space, that is not a light assignment, and really have to be self-aware. Ask yourself, do you have the capacity to handle that journey? Let me give an example. So I tried therapy during that same time frame when I was in my 20s, and I went to therapy. And I think I would say I was probably in a form of mild depression. Like I said, I just lost my dad. I just worked with a woman that was dating at the time for 6 years, thought we'd get married. And I got fired from my job all in a matter of 6 months. It was a lot. And because other things happened, I had to move back home with my mama at 26 years old, right? So here I am, a grown ass man. I mean, sorry for cussing, right? I'm a grown man doing all these things with her, right? And having to process the world through those lenses. So I tried therapy. I had tried therapy. Well, at that time, I tried therapy. And the therapist dismissed my concerns.
Wow.
People said, "Hey, I think you just have mild grade depression. I think you're actually okay. You should probably just wait it out." Now, luckily, I love my life and I love myself. I'm going to say that word, all right. But in the wrong hands,
Yeah.
in the wrong hands of a person who receives that could lend itself to somebody walking down a very dangerous path, i.e., suicide, right? You know what I'm saying? So that was a powerful wake up call to realize. It wasn't until years later, and I'm transparent saying this, years later, probably this past year, I've given therapy another chance again. Found a phenomenal therapist I see now on a regular basis, and it's given me the safe space I need to talk to. But yeah, I would say definitely that's how I handled that space back then. Probably not very well. had I had a safe space, it probably took me probably a good 6 years plus to process that traumatic life experience. I think if I had a safe space, I probably could have healed much sooner. But it probably took about 5-6 years. I would say that point. Yeah.
Wow. Wow, that's something amazing. And it also speaks to the power of having the right therapist, because not every therapist is the right fit. And we may have to go through a number of people before we get one. And, men may not go through the journey of one to the next to the next. It may take some time to see that happen. I see Deanne is saying that she thinks that men do go to a safe place to cry. It's a place where not because they don't want their wife or fiance to see them weak, which brings us to something we spoke about earlier about what society has dictated that men should be. Like, crying is weakness, and we don't want our significant other to see us as weak, particularly if they can't hold that space for us when we're at our lowest moment. You and I had a conversation. You spoke just a few minutes ago about going through a situation where you are supporting your wife, and if as a married unit, you both went through a traumatic experience where you are no longer able to naturally have kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you know I want to know what that experience was like for you as a man, because, more often we gravitate to the women and we're like, we're so sorry this happening to you. We give them a lot of reinforcement. But as a man, did you feel seen? And where did you go to cry?
I would say, so as I shared earlier for your audience members, my wife and I went through a hysterectomy, and I'm very, very conscious of using those words that she and I went through a hysterectomy. Yes, she went through the physical operation, but we were affected by it together. During that experience, I was processing a lot of what it meant to be a husband, what it meant to be a provider, a protector as well, the entire journey. And who do I redefine myself if I am not a father or don't have kids, right? Or I don't have kids biologically in many ways. And what I felt during that experience was some degree of isolation. Not from my wife from that standpoint, because when I would share with a couple people and I would share what's going on, for a lot of them, the first question was, "How's your wife? How's your wife doing? How is she handling this journey?" And then some on occasion would follow the question, "Well, how are you doing with this? With all right, or how are you feeling with all right?" And what I realized was that yes, conception is a woman-dominated experience, but the man is also part of the equation as well there too, right? And when we don't include the partner in the conversation, it can be very lonely and isolating. So where did I go? I mean, practically, I went to the gym. I go work out. I was maybe told this to my wife. There are many times I was at the gym working out and I was crying while lifting weights. Literally, I had to just get the energy off of me. You know what I'm saying? I would just, I would just lift it out, weight it out, go to weights, pound the iron, because I had no place to go. I didn't know where to go. It was a very unique situation, which is funny. Not say funny, but in hindsight, I probably should have started therapy much sooner than I did now. Even though I'm married to a therapist, I was still hesitant to go to therapy. I'm very transparent to the guys out there and the women out there, right? But it wasn't until last year I was like, and it actually was a good male friend of mine who highly suggested therapy. So I think from safe space conversations, oftentimes I think men need to seek examples outside of their own circle for creating safe spaces. So I really, a dear good friend of mine, we're going back for 20 plus years. He was sharing his therapy experience. And I was thinking about going to therapy as well there too. And he would say, like, man, you deserve therapy for yourself. Regardless of whatever happens, your wife thinks it's for yourself. And through that kind of coaxing and coaching, I did make the decision to go to therapy as well. And fast forward, several months later, I got a phenomenal therapist and has helped me to process a lot of good things. So So I think when you're talking about can men find a place to go cry, I would ask men, what are the men in their lives doing to create safe spaces for themselves? Oftentimes they just need to see an example of what a safe space looks like. So for me, it was realizing that my good friend, who we go back a couple of decades, says, "Hey, I've been in therapy, man. I know what it's like. I can vouch for it. You should go." Despite, as I say, being married to a therapist who recommends therapy overall, you know what I'm saying? So you would think having an inside track, I will go to therapy, but yes, so that's what I would say.
Okay. I see Paulette is saying that yes, we often neglect the man's emotions in situations like that, as well as miscarriages, and yeah, often, often we do. We don't see it as an extension of the woman in the marriage. It's just really of the woman. But it's great that you had that example, and I love that you share that men need examples outside of their immediate circle, so that they can see what to do. They have someone that they can look up to and see how may have navigated a situation before. So that's such a wonderful suggestion. And I commend you, Bert, on going back for therapy and for finding a safe space, because there could have been like all sorts of different options for you. Like you didn't have to choose to go to the gym. You could have gone other places, like you could have gone to the bar, you could have found comfort in another woman. Like there were other things that you could do, but you chose a gym, which again was still a safe space for your marriage, even though it only provided you with physical release and perhaps not processing of your mental and emotional. I see Instagram is saying therapy, oh yes. And so go ahead.
The question was that the value of associations as I got older has put a very, I can't even put a price on that. Had I not have a good friend who's gone through this experience, I don't know if I would have chose therapy myself. Now, let me put in perspective. You and I have been in similar spaces in the past, Questa, so we've got a lot of coaching experience. Yeah. We've gone through a lot of personal development as well, right? But sometimes even in that's not enough. Like I've done a lot of personal development, a lot of courses as well there too. And I realized at the end of the day, I still needed somewhere where I can go to talk to as well there too. So I share that with the the men and women out there watching, is that it's okay to ask for help. And I also say, what's the alternative to not asking for help for whatever it is, right? Do you want to ruin either your life or your marriage or your relationship with her, right? If you don't ask for help, that's really is the alternative, which is that you're not going to be able to function properly. And as I shared earlier, you would have what I call emotional leakage at some point, which for some could be minor, and for others it could be dramatic. And what I realized for me, my emotional leakage was starting to become very dramatic and have consequences I didn't want to have happen. So that's why I recommend that people consider outside resources as well. So yeah.
Yes, wow, that's really good, Bert. Thank you for that. I also want to deepen this conversation about personal development. It's my opinion, I don't have any facts, right? That women spend more time in personal development than men. The numbers just look that way to me. And so little boys have trauma, right? Growing up, little boys have trauma. As little girls, we have trauma. We all have different experiences that frame our beliefs. And more women than men work through those situations. And so we may have men who are 30s, 40s that are still struggling with trauma and not exactly knowing how to deal with it. What advice would you give to a woman who supports such a man, where it's not a safe space for that person to begin to touch those triggers that have nothing to do with their relationship or nothing to do with what's happening in their lives, but it may be things that spark historical events that created a sense of something in them? Like, what advice would you give for cultivating a safe space for someone who's not conscious of how the trauma is triggering them?
That's a great question. So a couple things come to mind when I think about that question is, so I want to talk about it I'm going to share some thoughts that I share with my wife and thoughts from the man's standpoint. So I think from the wife's standpoint, it would be that she constantly reaffirms her love and support for him. And that includes saying that I respect you. You are the man of my life, or you're the man of the household. Because one of the, I believe, the biggest fears men have when it comes to safe space is that to expose themselves emotionally is equated to being less masculine. Let me say it again. I think for some men to be equated to show themselves emotionally vulnerable or available can be equated to being less masculine or more feminine. And so long as he knows that regardless of how he shows up in the marriage, the woman has his back, loves him, different things. I think he'll feel okay and create little opportunities for him to share certain things. From the man's standpoint, he has to be at a point where he's ready to really deal with those demons, those traumas, those issues. Because until he's not, it just isn't going to happen unless there's a significant event or a significant episode that causes an interruption, right? And so what you're trying to do, I think from a woman's standpoint, is hopefully try to create release valves in the marriage where he has opportunities to kind of just release these stresses, you know what I'm saying? And that allows them to kind of feel safe to go there. And like, as I've said many times, maybe he just needs to go to therapy, you know what I'm saying? And, or have another outlet that's safe as well, right? We talk about, in, biblical terms that, that the man is the head of the household, right? And he submits to God and women submit to their husband. We also talk about how, like, structurally, even though the man submits to God, the wife is still the neck of the head, right? And so how she uses her feminine ways to turn his head to see certain things is how she can best properly support his better health. And I think as men, we want help. We don't know how to ask for help. We're not defined as a culture to learn how to ask for help. So I know personally, when I get in struggle or trial tribulations, I have to be willing to say, "Hey, babe, I need some help here." And it's a learned muscle. It's a learned muscle, right? Like, because I think we always want to be the Superman, whatever, right? But I use the chessboard analogy. I think it's very important, which is that although the king is the most valuable piece on the chessboard, the queen is the most powerful, and she has the greatest opportunity to protect her king on the entire chessboard. So I think the same thing applies in life, that the queen really can protect the king if she can help him maneuver and see the value, probably having this question there. So I think that's how I would answer that question for our safe spaces, which is it's out there, but from women, your man has to feel validated and still respected when it's all said and done.
Okay. That's a powerful, powerful, powerful word and response, Bert. I have to chew on that for a little while.
Yeah.
I see Deanne is saying some men don't want to go to therapy because they think they can solve their problems on their own. And Esther is saying that you made a really good point. And I think that was the point about them, the men being at a place when they're ready to make changes, because it won't happen, or address those issues, because it won't happen until they're really ready to go to that place. So if you go ahead, sorry, go ahead.
So the comment that Deanne said hits home, because I think for many men, we are defined by what we do and not who we are. Let me say it again. Men oftentimes define ourselves by what we do and not who we are. So I think the opportunities for growth for women is to create a space that you accept your man for who they are, not what they do. Let me say that again. Can you accept your man in your life for who they are and not what they do? So let me give you an example. Let's say you guys are married, and at some point, God forbid, he loses his job. Maybe he's making phenomenal income, money got a little tight, He may have promised you a lifestyle that he provided for you for a period of time, and things shifted for whatever reason, right? And for him, his self-worth came from his capacity to provide and protect. That's how probably in our heads how we value ourselves. It's what we do. Is what we do is how we value ourselves. But who we are is not always recognized the same way. We may be just good men, faithful men, good leaders, good fathers, good friends, good brothers, whatever, right? If you can, I believe, create a space that, regardless of his title or his income or his profession, that you can love, if you respect him based on that point, he will be, I think, more open to have a safe space to share. You know what I'm saying? That's what I'm going to cut you off the question, but I would say
No,
that's
that's really interesting, especially that men are defined by what they do, right? The title, the provider, protector, those sorts of things, versus like who they are, right? And we all want validation. We all want to be supported, but women have a greater expectation of the men in their lives to fulfill certain roles. I see Paulette is saying that she thinks society plays a huge role in why men don't seek therapy or get to a place where they're self-aware. Toxic masculinity is a huge issue. They stick to those rigid gender norms and think they have it all under control. What do you think, Bert?
That's a loaded statement right there. So, what does toxic masculinity mean? And I'm gonna say, and remember, I go back to my earlier comment earlier in the beginning when I write. I think we're seeing a shift on what it means to be masculine or a man over the last few years with our right. And so there's so many things I want to say about that, but so I don't want, in this cancel culture, you can say the wrong thing, and I don't want to end your show, DeQuesta.
Let's give you a safe space to express.
Right.
We're going to give you a safe space to express.
Yeah, but what I here are some conversations that I hear taking place, and I want to be mindful to keep it vague, so I'm not out anybody in the world I interact with. All right, but I think that there's a feeling that masculinity is under attack, and so the word toxic for me can be triggering, because I think, well, what does that mean, right? What does toxic masculinity mean, right? On one hand, you have the portrayal of somebody who's hyper aggressive. You know what I'm saying? On the whole other spectrum is somebody who could be effeminate, and there's a whole spectrum in the middle, whatever, right? Of that particular man who lives a life, who understands, who can quote unquote be manly and have the nurturing energy at the same time, whatever, right? And to process all societal expectations. I would argue that men rise to the occasion of what women expect, more often than not. I think men respond. I think here's a dirty secret. I think men will respond more to what women do than the other way around. I think men, I think about James Brown's song, right? It's a man's world, but it means nothing without a woman, right? Because I think we leave the men in their own devices. They have a very simple lifestyle. Hey, they'll just live as bastards the rest of their lives, right? You know what I'm saying? I get counted many men, including myself, when we had our wives, our ladies, they made us better people, right? So I think to that point, the toxic masculinity can be a touchy subject in this world, because we have to redefine what does it mean now to be a man. How do we define it? And especially in a space where women are getting a lot more financial independence, which is phenomenal, should be celebrated. You know what I'm saying? And yet now in that elevation of women, where do men fit in that role? In that conversation piece with her, right? And so there's a time and place where a man was defined by his capacity to provide and protect financially. Now when women are in a space where they have the capacity to be able to provide for themselves, and I'm gonna say very clear, that's wonderful. Like, I'm not discouraging any of that. Now, where do men now fit in the equation, right? You know what I'm saying? And because now, you're now having more emotionally based conversations in many ways, not so much a financial conversation. So I don't know. It's just that can go a lot of different ways. It is conversations I've had with other men about that, and it's for certain men that's a triggering statement. Like that is not how they feel. They're like, I'm just being a man trying to take care of my life, take care of my family, and be a protector wherever I can. So I don't know. That's just my thoughts. Yeah.
Okay, I see Mr. Henderson is saying that masculinity is under attack. And so I wonder if men feel like they are in competition with women, if they're in relationship or in marriages. Do they feel that they are competing for what their defined rules should be? Or are they feeling, what are they feeling in response to the feminists and the rise up of women who want to do everything that traditionally men did, and how does that impact their safe space?
I don't know. I don't know if I ever had the magic wand. I don't know if I have the magic wand, DeQuesta, or the easy answer. Well, I have a simple answer. I don't know if it's the easy answer. And the simple answer is that the two individuals that are in a relationship that are married, they have to define for themselves their own eternal expectations. So if a woman has been a successful professional large part of her life, if a man has done the same, or vice versa, you know what I'm saying? How they define their roles is between them themselves. So if that means that in the world, she's a boss lady, she's a CEO, but she comes home, she is Miss Wife and Miss domesticated. That's fine. Like that's how they define their marriage, right? I'm saying, or if he is Mr. CEO in the world and he comes home and he's daddy daycare, that's fine too, right? So there isn't an easy answer, but the answer is they have to define what they want their lives to look like together, right? I do think there are some interesting points about going back to safe space, right? How do we accept and create a space for that? It's going to go back to what are they willing to receive and create a space for themselves. And it's a broader generalization about, are women okay with a highly emotionally intelligent man? Truly, like, are they may say they want it until it doesn't really serve them. You know what I'm saying? Because a man may call them on their ish. You know what I'm saying? Or they just want a man that's very, very passive. You know what I'm saying? And the terminology has changed, right? We talk about the alpha man, the beta man, the sigma man. You know what I'm saying? And we heard the phrase of the alpha woman versus kind of the submissive woman, right? Different things, right? And so even society has given quote unquote cute names to women and or men based on their personality traits, whatever, right? So I don't have an easy answer to the question. I don't know.
Okay. I mean, it was really a deep question. That was, really a deep question, and it's just a lot of gray areas. I agree with that because it really depends on in coupledom. But when we look at the world generally, something you said earlier in our conversation hit me because I know of many women who have attempted suicide, right? I'm included, right? And then I never really looked at the stats to determine the difference between men and women in closing. And so when you shared with me that more men close in suicide than women, it makes me wonder and think that at the heart of a man, um, and growing up as a man in our community, I can only speak to our community, which is Caribbean and Black. Like there are certain things little boys are told that they're not supposed to cry. They call them punks for if they fall down and skin their knee or whatever and get up, you minimize the pain that a little boy is feeling, but you gentle up the little girl. So of course that's, already a rift. As they navigate through life, essentially they're being told to hold their emotions and not express their emotions. And I want to ask our viewers to answer in the comments if you really think that you could handle emotionally vulnerable man who is bearing his all to you. Answer that in the comments for me as I ask Bert to tell us, what can men do outside of relationships
Mm.
to have a place to go to cry? It's not all about relationships and marriages. You know, there's the work culture, there's the male culture, there's civic or social involvements. You have conflict everywhere. What are some methods that men can use to cultivate safe spaces outside of their relationships?
Well, if let's say a man is not in a committed relationship, if there could be one couple of tips I would share with them is to consider working on themselves. And what does that mean? That means maybe they find a book, maybe they find a workshop, um, that they could tap into a community that creates a space for them where they feel okay sharing some thoughts. But more importantly, I would say, do they truly have that one friend in their life that they can truly lean on to be able to share some of their most deepest, most tender thoughts? For it, I'm blessed. I have a couple of friends in my life, that I can share some pretty in-depth thoughts and trust that it be kept within the two of us. So, like I said, for men who aren't in a committed relationship, do you have friends you have? And if you don't currently have friends, maybe it's time to figure out how to cultivate or nurture those type of friendships. For one, the second thing is, what outlets do you have to help you process your trauma in your life or your life journey that you're going through? Is it journaling? Is it, someone said fitness? Is it man groups? Mr. Henderson mentioned in the comments there, but this past weekend, a group of guys started this 100-day journal challenge where we get together once every 25 days and just do manly check-ins, right? And so that accountability, that support network meant that we had a space to go to just share what's coming up. During the pandemic, when the pandemic happened a few years ago, I started creating a men's walking group in the morning where we just walk around the neighborhood about 45 minutes to an hour, just to talk, just to get together, fellowship. I call it fitness and fellowship. We walk for 45 minutes to an hour, talk about everything from sports to sex, politics to philosophy and different things. So some of the guys are married, some of the guys are not married. What it provided was just associations for us as well. Because men, when we have something to talk about, and I laugh about this because if you ask them, most men, especially man to man, and you'll ask how you doing, or what's coming up for you, or what's going on. They're like, man, I'm just trying to make it. Or man, I'm, how it is right there. Or man, I'm trying to, rob from Peter to pay Paul, right? Which, from a man's side, that represents far deeper issues going on that they want to say.
Right.
And what the gauge is, how much can you really handle what I'm about to tell you, all right? And so part of that is, are the men in your life, I'm talking for men, I'm talking to men to a male audience, do the men who watch this show feel like they have other men that if they were to lean on emotionally could handle that? I don't know how many men have that space. Women, I think women are taught to have emotional circles, support circles. I don't think men are, but I'm blessed. I kind of have fostered that for the last few years to have masculine emotional safe space with other men. But that's I hope I am the rule and not the exception, but I don't know. So yeah.
All right. I see Deanne is saying that I think regardless of who make the most money, it's combining together as one in terms of marriage and to respect each other. I see Mr. Henderson said men have to learn positive coping strategies, journal, fitness, fishing, man groups, etc. And I see Paulette is saying that social groups or friendship circles of emotionally intelligent men who make them feel safe, right? And so, Bert, yes, one, they need an anchor, right? Everybody needs an anchor. And so when men can find that one person that can be an example or an anchor, someone that they could go to free of judgment, right? They can share their innermost thoughts. They can ask for guidance. They can ask for those experiences. That helps. We all like learning from someone years ahead of us, right? Secondly, I heard you say that, being in these groups, it gives them something outside of themselves to do so. So coming with you walking or fishing, it gives while it's about building you, it gives you something to look forward to in a group of other men with camaraderie. And it's
Mhm.
great to do that in men with similar values or whose values you want to learn. So if
Mhm.
you are a man and you want to level up your life, you want to attach yourself to other men who are elevating their lives as well. So those are really, really great points. Now, we're going to bring our conversation to a close in just a few minutes. And so I want you to speak to the women. You gave us some tidbits along the way
Mhm.
about what it means to cultivate that safe space, like, giving them, being the neck and asking questions, and, the queen actually rules, right? We heard all of that. But what would you give as practical things that they can implement now if they're in a marriage, if they're in a relationship, a mother son relationship? What are a few things that they can immediately do to have him choose her as his place to cry?
Mm. That's good. There are a few things that come to mind when I think about women creating a safe space for the men in their lives, whether they're sons or their brothers or their husband, right? What I would share is love them, but men, I think, really value respect. And what type of words of affirmations are you speaking into to your man's life? Whatever it is, like say your son, or a colleague, or whether it is your husband or your significant other, are you truly speaking to the king within of that person? Somebody said earlier the question I thought was very powerful. That's often said sometimes that women, that daughters are raised, sons are loved, and that means that we create spaces for women or young girls to be emotionally open, but we don't create the same spaces for men, regardless of what culture you're in, where, right? And so that means that men can be very hard on the outside, but they really actually really soft on the inside in some ways. That's probably one of the biggest fears I think men have, is that you'll find how soft they really are on the inside. I think anybody who's ever been married, who's married or have a man in their life, sometimes the running joke is that my husband really is a big baby at the end of the day. They're just little kids, right? You know what I'm saying? Because when we feel that low of comfort and at ease, we just let our guards down with our right. You know what I'm saying? I think about when my wife's sitting on the couch watching TV, and she said, I want to lay my head on her lap and just fall asleep, right? Like a little kid. So, but to your question, is she speaking life into the king of that man, and can she still make it feel valid as a masculine person regardless of what shows up? And if he's having a breakdown, like a significant, like full blown, just like he is broken down, I would say take a deep breath, because now he is admitted to you in his actions that he feels the most ultimate form of safety within your arms, within your capacity. And how you navigate that space could really mean the difference between life or death. I'm not even trying to not trying to exaggerate. Literally, it could be in the case of life or death. Because now he's realizing, if he is this open to you, and he's never been this open to anybody else ever, and you're not sure how to navigate that space, and he feels traumatized from his responses, he could have a very adverse reaction to it. All right. So I would say for women, and be okay. Hey, look, I'm processing this too. You know what I'm saying? That's a lot to handle. Um, let's seek counsel together. Let's figure it out together. Like, babe, I love you to death. This is a lot to handle. Like, let's go therapy together. Like, show that you are their teammate. Show that you are willing to ride die with them. You know what I'm saying? I think that I just did a YouTube video today, and the gentleman said he's a very successful businessman. He said, I don't care what the world thinks, but as long as my wife got my back, that's all that matters. I'm okay, right? And here's another analogy I thought was very powerful, which is this between Samson and Delilah, whatever, right? Samson is a very powerful, strong figure in the Bible, was untouchable except for the touch of a woman.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I think when I tell women, women have the capacity to build the most vibrant and the most resilient and strong men, and I'll carry them down into the most lowest form of themselves. So that's what I share with women out there. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, that's some really great advice, Bert. Thank you so very much. I can't believe that 55 minutes has passed so quickly. It was just so full, so rich, so much information. I think I'm gonna have to watch the replay at least, 3 or 4 times because there was so many golden nuggets that you provided with us. Thank you for your vulnerability and sharing some of your personal stories and how you navigated them. Thank you for advocating for therapy for men to be okay with therapy because there's this negative stigma attached to men in therapy. And so thank you for speaking and advocating for that, for couples to go to therapy together as well to work through some of those issues. Thank you for not just giving men a blind, but also helping them to understand that they have a responsibility in this as well. Their personal development is on them, and to find support outside of their relationships,
Mhm.
do things with other men that can be good role models. So you spoke to both sides of the spectrum, and you also help women to understand that it's how they respond, what they say, the atmosphere that they cultivate that could give a safe space for men. So a number of those things will work
Yeah.
together to
Right.
assist, right? And we all know that there's no overnight
Mm-hmm. Right.
change. Right? It's a process and it takes time. So, are there any closing? I know you just said something. Anything else you want to say before we close?
Well, once again, thank you, the question for this opportunity, right? To be on your show, to make history. I think that's the first male guest we've had on this show. So I take that to heart. But I would say at the end of the day, I just want to be a stand for healthy relationships between men and women, specifically black men. I'll be very transparent, especially for our black men, right? Because I think as a black man, as black men, we are in a unique space currently in these times, and black men and black women are trying to find ways to communicate with one another. So my final thoughts would be this: is that as from to the black women, we love you. I think all black men would say that out loud to you. But to my brothers, I would say this: that I love you. If you haven't heard from anybody else today, and that I got your back, and that I want to see you succeed. And as kings, our community needs us to be the best version of ourselves and the healthiest version of ourselves, because we can help change the world for what we do.
Okay, Bert. I've also put your Facebook link
Yeah.
in the chat for men or women, anyone that would like to connect with Bert, stay connected with him, and learn from his wisdom. I will tell you that not only is he great at helping men, he's great at helping small business and larger businesses. He has how much $1 million you have? One Tony Robbins and somebody else. Like,
Yeah, I've helped one organization create multiple 7 figures, and I've helped other businesses create probably combine probably over 9 figures in business as well there too. So, but I would say that I think this is probably the segue to the men's retreat at some point. So be on the lookout for that as well. God's calling me to just shut up and just be obedient.
I'm looking forward to the men's retreat because I believe we focus so much on providing safe spaces for women and personal development courses and retreats and all of that for women. It'll be great to see more of that for men. So I'm looking forward and I'll definitely share that. So, Bert, hang on for me. Don't leave. I'm going to close out my show. Guys, thank you so much for being here today, for participating, for sharing your comments, asking your questions. If you're catching us on the replay, please make sure that you put some of your comments in the comments field. We'll come back and check them to hear what your take is on where men go to cry and how we cultivate safe spaces for men. As women, we hold so many titles, and it's our responsibility to make sure that we learn how to master each one of those titles, whether that's business, whether that's wife, whether that's mom, whether that's friend, it doesn't matter. We hold so many of them. And learning how to cultivate safe spaces will not only benefit the men in our lives, but it will benefit every relationship. If you've also enjoyed tonight's dialogue, please share the video so that others can benefit and learn from it. I'll see you again on the next episode of Safe Space Conversations next week, Thursday at 7 p.m. That's September 7th. Take care, guys, and God bless you all.